What do the fates have in store for Gladiator II? Is it mercy or death? Well, I don't know about the fates, but I'm going to give it mercy because I ended up actually really enjoying this film more so than I thought I would, especially because I just recently saw the first Gladiator for the first time and I loved it. I think it's a masterpiece of a film. And while this is not as good, just gonna throw that out there. It's still a solid film. It's more aligned with what I thought Gladiator was gonna be before I saw the original movie, where it's just like your big action, epic set piece film with good visuals, good acting, but nothing that's particularly unique. And I do think that that's like what this film is. It's a solid film, but it's missing a lot of the uniqueness and like the weird things that made the original Gladiator so unique. Like some of the visuals aren't as zany, for lack of a better word, and the score, I'll get to that later in my review, it's not as good. But I do think that a big thing about whether a movie you're going to consider good or bad is how it leaves you at the end of it. And I would say that the first hour and 30 to 45 hour and a half, hour 45 minutes were fine, but the last 45 minutes were freaking epic and amazing. And that's when the film really came into its own and became something more than just a legacy sequel to the original Gladiator, because up until then they were following the original pretty much beat for beat. And when this film names itself Gladiator II, they really mean it, in the sense that it literally is just the original film but times two. There are two Maximus characters, with Paul Mescal being the main one, and then also Pedro Pascal. There are two Joaquin Phoenixes with Joseph Quinn and Fred. I'm blanking on his last name, but he's actually really good in this film. And then Denzel Washington is sort of also there. He's like the only really new thing. And of course, Connie Nielsen, who ends up actually being kind of the heart of this film. But yeah, it's just more Gladiator, not necessarily something that's a little different, something that is like worthy of a sequel in my opinion. But again, once you see it, those last 45 minutes to the last hour are really good, that I don't mind. I can forgive the sins of the hour and a half before that. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me about this Gladiator is that it really reflects a lot of the general consensus on America. Whereas in the original Gladiator, you have Maximus, who really still believes in Rome and believes that Rome can be better, and it's just like a few people at the top who are just running it very poorly, and there is hope for a new Rome. I think this film reflects today's anger at America, where a lot of the people are just have completely lost all hope that there is any good left. The whole American dream, the Rome dream, like the parallels are a lot more evident in this film, and I do think that that sets it apart a little bit. Paul Mescal, he is essentially an angrier version of Maximus. He's more disillusioned with what he's seen Rome become, which again, I do think reflects the times, and Paul Mescal does a really great job at portraying this complexity, but we've known he's a great actor. Is he a movie star? I think he is. But I do think that this film holds him back a little bit because it does still want to make him Maximus in a way. Where Maximus was kind of like a natural leader. He was, very traditional warrior, soldier, general. But Paul Mescal is a little bit messier. He's a little bit edgier. And this is just like him, like that's the vibe that he gives off. And so when they're trying to pigeonhole him in a little bit of like the leader, like the natural born leader, I don't think he's a natural born leader. And I think that that's okay, because I think that's what makes him so interesting, that he assumes the role of leadership despite not having that natural sensibility that Maximus does. He's a completely different person. And I think that that's when he shines best in this role, is when he's like not being tied down by the script, trying to make him into Maximus. But again, very excited. Would love to see him in more movies, more Gladiator movies, more just films in general. I really liked him, and I also just kind of want to be his buddy, he just has like a good vibe to him. Denzel Washington, I understand the hype behind him and the chatter behind him potentially getting not just a nomination for Best Supporting Actor, but potentially a win. And I will say, all of that energy I think comes from the last hour, because up until then he's good because he's Denzel Washington, but there's nothing really special about what his role is until that last hour where his plan kind of comes into motion, and he's just a brilliant foil to Paul Mescal and to just the entire idea that they're trying to create in this narrative. And I think that that's a really compelling thing. And kind of getting back to the story, the reason why the last hour is so works so well and leaves such like a good impression is because this film, like I mentioned earlier, is just an excess of the original Gladiator. And as the film goes on, the narrative streamlines, you get rid of a lot of the noise, and you're left with something that feels a lot more human, that you can connect to a lot more. Because honestly, I was not feeling the film before that. I couldn't, I wasn't emotionally tied to anything happening on screen. It was just like things moving, noises happening, people fighting, but it didn't mean anything to me up until that shift. And I think that the film needed to tighten itself up, and it needed to leave the shadow of the original Gladiator for it to become its own unique, really great piece to the film canon. I do think that that happens in the last hour, which is why I love this. Ended up liking this film a lot more than I probably would have if it was just doing what it did at the beginning. Connie Nielsen, she is really the only one from the original Gladiator film that comes back in any major role. And again, she is so good. Her role here is significantly reduced, as is everyone's, because again, when you have so many characters, you don't have time to develop them very well. But Connie Nielsen is just, there's like a natural warmth to her that this film desperately needs, because again, you really don't feel connected to anything that's happening in this film, but I think she is like, she's the beating heart of this film. She unites all of the different storylines. Everything kind of comes in through her, and her love for her son, her love for Rome, for just like the dream. It really grounds this film and like puts it all together. She's the glue of this film, and she does a great job at it. I wish she had more to do and more to say, because she is just a phenomenal actress. But again, this film doesn't have a whole lot of space to develop everyone fully. Pedro Pascal, Joseph Quinn, Fred, I'm blanking on his last name, but they're all really good. They deliver really solid performances. And yeah, again, nothing we haven't necessarily seen from them before, but it's nice to see them in a film, just because it's always nice to see them in films. I will say, kind of going into what dragged this film down a little bit, I visually, I think it's a beautiful film visually, but again, it doesn't have like those weird edits that the original did, that I think made it so charming and added a lot of warmth to that film. This is a lot more lean, mean, in terms of like the visual style of it. Even like the rhino sequence and the shark sequence, things that feel like they would be a little camp, just like a little bit. It feels very pale, I guess would be the right word, or just like monochromatic. That's the vibe of it. Not necessarily that it visually looks like that, just the vibe of it. Also, the score. I don't know who did the score, if it was Hans Zimmer returning, but he's a busy guy, so maybe it wasn't. But the score really didn't help this film. I think that it was very much a character in and of itself in the original Gladiator film, and it really, the parts where I felt the most in this film was when they were using some of the themes from the original movie in this. It like really moves you because it's so beautiful and melancholy and operatic and just like epic. And the rest of the score here is like typical drama film score, typical like blockbuster things. Nothing that's particularly unique to this film, which is kind of a downside to this. I would say it's really a downer, because I really wanted more out of the score for this film. But again, nothing terrible. I will say overall, really like this film. I really am interested in this whole legacy sequel trend that we're seeing in Hollywood, and seeing how far it will go. I do think that creatively it's not super effective. You got Beetlejuice, you have Twisters, you have now Gladiator II, which I think the formula being developed for legacy sequels are essentially that you're just rebooting the original, but not really even totally redoing it, because then people would face backlash. But this, you keep a few legacy characters, and you essentially do the whole thing again. It's something that Scream has made fun of, while also doing, and I don't love it. I think creatively it hurts, but again, you can't argue with the box office. Beetlejuice, Twisters are some of the biggest box office hits of the year, and I'm sure Gladiator 2 is going to do really good this weekend. But it is a little disappointing just creatively. I would like people to take a little bit more risk here and there. Even if you keep like a skeleton of the original, just like make something unique, because these films all work so much better when they're trying to be their own thing. But yeah, that being said, I would be down for a third, because I do think that now that it's done the Gladiator thing, it can finally have an actual sequel, that it's its own thing, that it's unique. And yeah, I would highly recommend seeing this film if you're, just like a big action fan. I think that this is serviceable, enjoyable even. It is a tad bit long. And if you've seen the original Gladiator recently, you might be comparing it a lot throughout the film. But if you haven't, go ahead and go see it. Now, originally when I saw the first Gladiator, I had this thought of, was this the right choice? Was this not? Now looking back, I think it honestly really didn't matter, because I do think that I would feel the same way about this film regardless, just because it doesn't have that emotional aspect to it. And I felt this way about a lot of legacy sequels that I haven't seen the original two beforehand, or that I hadn't seen them in a while, and I don't think that would have affected it that much. That being said, I do think everyone should go see the original Gladiator, and I don't think that everyone has to see this one. But support my boy Paul Mescal and Pedro Pascal. They're great, and they deserve more roles, and they're getting them, so it's not like I need to advocate for them. But still, so damn it, I threw my finger away, so now I can't dramatically do that. But thumbs up for this film overall.